we're back with another episode of the Lakers Fast Break podcast. It's Gerald Glasser. Come right back at you here for the Lakers Fast Break, Pop Culture Cosmos, where we cover the latest news and trends in pop culture each and every week, twice a week, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, it's a big week this week for pop culture because the Writers Guild strike has ended effectively, with both sides coming to a tentative agreement. So we could see a lot going forward a lot sooner, which I know is going to make a lot of people out there happy. So we'll go ahead and discuss that later this week, right here at the Pop Culture Cosmos. But also as well, Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Go ahead and check out our thoughts on what's going on with the NFL and fantasy football. I'm going to try and see if I can sneak on Magic Man and Joe Soro for that show as well. So we'll go ahead and check out their thoughts after they had some definitive thoughts on our Sunday's Lakers Fast Break on the NFL. So you want to catch that. Actually, caught my family on surprise when I had it up on the refrigerator earlier today. Joe was quite mad, and so was Sean indeed. But go ahead and check that out from last night after you check out today's show. But Inside Sports Fantasy Football, of course, Joe Soro. You can find him as Ox1947 at LakersBall.com. Go ahead and support them today at Lakers Ball. Plus, also as well, he's got a great company. I know he's just getting off work. He's doing a lot of things with some clients. He's going to try and juggle his schedule to show up today for the great conversation we're having. But you know he runs his company. Of course, it's Simblades. Simblades with a Y.com. Also as well, of course, Laker Tom, the number one Lakers blogger that's out there, Jamie Sweet. You can find them at Lakerholics.com. Laker Tom was here over the weekend on Lakerholics Spotlight and had some things to say about the Lakers' current rotation and so much more. So go ahead and hear what he has to say, plus his latest articles at Lakerholics.com. Empire Jeff TV and John McCallion on YouTube. Please subscribe to those guys today. Great channels. One covers the NBA and one covers life and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So go ahead and check out both those great channels. And speaking of subscribing, please click on the little Joe Soro on the right-hand corner of your screen with the little beady eyes. Go ahead and click on it. It's okay. You can poke his eyeballs out. That's fine while you're subscribing, because when you do, you'll get the latest notifications on when we go live with the latest Lakers Fast Break podcast. Delano, good to have you here. Pretty appreciate it so much. Everybody else in the chat room, the best Lakers chat room that's out there, the Lakers Fast Break, truly appreciate it. But we're talking NBA observations. We going to be talking the Lakers on the back end of the show, as we always do, for team observations from every single team in the league. Today's we're going to be covering the Memphis Grizzlies, and here today to cover the Memphis Grizzlies, plus his thoughts on the Los Angeles Lakers and so much more. Great man indeed. You got to go ahead and check out all the great work that he does for Bluff City Media today, starting with bluffcitymedia.co. Right there for you. It is Joe Mullinax. And Joe, great to have you here. Truly appreciate your time and checking us out here at the Lakers Fast Break, talking today about the Memphis Grizzlies.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, it's still kind of a sore subject. You guys embarrassed us pretty good there in that first round series, things closing out. It got so bad we were counting on Luke Kennard to save us. So when you get that deep, you're pretty into the abyss, so to speak. So it was a tough end of the season, and unfortunately, the Lakers seem to have only gotten better. Right, they're a functional front office. They had a very good offseason. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's a good time to be a Lakers fan, better than it was several years ago before LeBron got there.
Absolutely. I did check out at that point in time after the playoffs just ended the thoughts of several of the Memphis Grizzlies fan boards, and they were not too pleased with the team, with the Lakers. It just seemed like a collective. Dylan Brooks obviously was a particular point of vitriol amongst the Memphis fan base, and he's gone on to a lot greener pastures, that's for sure. But moving him aside, you guys got to go ahead as far as with the season. Start of the season may not look as rosy for you guys as the back end of it, because the back end of it obviously should, with health willing, have everybody back in place. As far as let's see who you got. Steven Adams. He's coming back off an injury. He said, I think the belief is that he'll come off, I think right around the start of the season, he'll be ready. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the current plan, Grizzlies head coach Taylor Jenkins was interviewed recently. He's hopeful that they are going to have him clear from the jump of training camp here in the next few days, which is good.
How about Brandon Clark? Because I know he has also had a great injury as well, and I know he's coming back at working hard, of course, to get back into the lineup.
Sure, torn Achilles, so that's a little bit more long term. He suffered that injury in March, I believe. So even with the advances in modern medicine, it won't be till early 2024 that he'll be back. The Grizzlies have some depth in the front court. They have Santi Aldama, who the Lakers effectively bullied in the playoff series this past year. But at least in terms of bodies, they have Santi Aldama. They have Xavier Tillman Sr., who did a semi-good job, as good of a job as you can when you're a center defending LeBron James.
Yeah.
So I would say that they have some depth in that front court that won't necessarily lead them to being in a position where they miss Brandon Clark as much, but the athleticism of Clark obviously is unique and really gives Memphis a different kind of attack than what Steven Adams would do as a big. They can be a little more versatile defensively. So they'll miss Clark, but at least they have more bodies in the front court that they can throw at the problem.
I agree with you on that. Again, you've got a lot of variances once everybody is healthy and back up and running to throw at people, especially in the front court, definitely. But obviously, the season, why I said might not start as well as you would normally hope, is that due to partially because of the 25 game suspension that Ja Morant has going for him.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts on that and how it affects the team? Obviously, in years past, if you've seen and checked out the records, they haven't done too bad at all and have done extremely well when Ja Morant has been out of the lineup. But with Tyus Jones gone, that may change.
That's a significant point to make. I think that we underestimate how Tyus Jones allowed for the Grizzlies to play a different style of basketball than they do with Ja Morant. You know, the lazy thing to say is that the Grizzlies are better without Ja Morant. That's obviously not true. That'd be like saying the Lakers are better without LeBron James or the Lakers are better without Anthony Davis. Even if there's some numbers that maybe suggest they might be in certain categories, obviously the Lakers need those guys. And Ja Morant is that guy for the Memphis Grizzlies. However, with Tyus Jones as the starting point guard, they play a different style of basketball that moves the ball a little bit more, finding the great shot as opposed to the good shot. There's less isolation scoring opportunities, especially from the main ball handler. In the case of Tyus, when he was here in Memphis. And that matters, right? The way that they played was different, and that led to the Grizzlies' success. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. People kind of assume that that's going to continue. I don't necessarily. And that doesn't mean that I'm down on Marcus Smart, because I think he's a great guy to bring in to this Grizzlies organization for multiple reasons. I wrote about it over at Bluff City Media, talked about it over on Locked On Grizzlies, our podcast that I do with my co-host Michael Cole, who's the commercial appeals beat writer there in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm not as sold on that because Marcus Smart is not a true point guard like Tyus Jones is a true point guard, right? If you followed the Boston Celtics this past year at all, this was the first time that they really had Boston had Marcus Smart being that true point guard, at least in a traditional sense, and he struggled at times. I don't think that's the best use of him. I think he is a combo guard that is a good secondary facilitator. He's not a great primary facilitator of offense. And that's going to be an adjustment. So Desmond Bane's there. Obviously, that's very helpful. Desmond Bane is one of the most underrated players in the NBA. Jaren Jackson Jr. coming off a Defensive Player of the Year award. Steven Adams' return is going to be significant. But I do believe that you're going to see some growing pains because Smart and Tyus are two different types of point guards. They're not going to be able to do it the same way without Ja that they have in the past.
Once again, go ahead and check out the great work, of course, with Joe Mullinax at Bluff City Media. Please go ahead and check out his great work today. It cannot be stressed enough to go ahead also as well to check out his great Locked On podcast as well, right there for you. But also here today, good man indeed. He's the madman for Toronto. He did get out of Toronto traffic to put on that awesome Lakers hockey jersey. It is the Magic Man, Sean Grice. The Magic Man, great to have you here talking some Memphis Grizzlies and Los Angeles Lakers. Your thoughts, my friend, as Joe Mullinax is here. He's here to answer your questions, my friend. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to have you on the show, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
So we know that the three cornerstones for the Grizzlies are Ja, Triple J, and now Desmond Bane. I love Desmond Bane. as a basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
He's smart. He's tough. He understands what they're trying to do out there. He picks up other teammates when they make mistakes, and he doesn't. He just goes back and does his job. He's not so full of himself either. He's got a lot of humility out there. He's also one of the deadliest 3-point shooters in the NBA. And
Mm-hmm.
you combine that with somebody like Luke Kennard, who the Clippers boneheadedly decided to trade at the trade deadline, and Memphis was the team that benefited from that. I mean, look, you could say a lot about Luke's defense, but he is an excellent 3-point shooter, and he helps the team with their offensive versatility. So I agree with your assessment about Smart. That's why I think it's Taylor Jenkins. We know is one of the best coaches in the NBA from an X's and O's point of view, Joe. So, who do you expect to step up? Because we know that those are the 3 cornerstones. So there's only 2 other starting spots, right?
Sure.
And Chris Kleiman has drafted supremely well over the past 4 years. So, like, who's going to step up here? Because there was thoughts that it was Zaire Williams a few years ago, right? But now Kenneth Lofton Jr. and kind of David Roddy have kind of stepped up and asserted themselves. How do you see Taylor juggling this depth? Because it's really nice.
Well, you're correct. Zach Kleiman, Grizzlies GM, has done a phenomenal job building the roster. And we were talking about recently the way that it's been built. This is kind of a preview of Tuesday's episode of Locked On Grizzlies. JJ Redick, Evan Turner, I don't know if you guys saw this or not, on an episode of Old Man and the Three. They went off on a tangent about NBA expansion. And Evan Turner said something about moving the Grizzlies out of Memphis to Nashville. And JJ Redick agreed. It's at Kansas City or some sort of thing like that. And JJ apologized for it, so I'm not trying to bash JJ Redick. But the point I'm trying to make is Memphis is not Los Angeles, right? I think your listeners and viewers probably understand that, even if they've never been to Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is not Miami. It's not New York. They have to build their roster differently. They can't depend on free agency. The biggest free agency signing in the history of the Memphis Grizzlies is Chandler Parsons. And that went horribly, right? So they have to do it through the draft. They have to do it via trade. They have to be very specific with the types of guys that they bring in, because Memphis is not one of those marquee markets that people want to go play for in free agency, like Los Angeles. No offense. Before LeBron, you guys weren't managed particularly well, and then LeBron shows up and things start turning around the right way because the weather's beautiful in Los Angeles and Hollywood's there. You know, it's not because of the Lakers dynasty at that point, because the Lakers hadn't been a dynasty in some time. But obviously, as I mentioned a moment ago, the Lakers have had a very good offseason, and I think they're back in that mix again this coming year. I want to acknowledge that Marcus Smart should be a starter, even though he does not have the traditional size on the wing. He is better than Zaire Williams. He's better than David Roddy. Jake LaRavia is another name that was important to what they want to do. They're just not ready, right? And to me, the Marcus Smart trade was the first salvo of Zach Kleiman saying, we're contending now. That was the first time that they gave up first-round picks in the entire Zach Kleiman era as a GM, was to go get Marcus Smart. So with that in mind, I think that is them saying, we're going to contend. It's now. They didn't trade away Tyus Jones and 2 first-round picks for him to be some guy off the bench. I think he's going to start even with Ja Morant is back. And then you have Steven Adams, who is one of the most underappreciated players in the NBA, an underappreciated passer. I always like to say he's elite at being a large human being. He understands how to set screens. He's very difficult to work around. You know, someone like Anthony Davis may not have the same kind of issues with Steven Adams that 90% of the league has because of his physical size and athleticism. But Steven Adams is a force to be reckoned with, and he provides space through those screens, and he provides elite, best of the best in the NBA offensive rebounding that helps an half-court offense that was ranked 25th last season in the NBA. That's the biggest weakness. With Marcus Smart and Jaren Jackson Jr. on your team, and Desmond Bane is an underrated defender in his own right, the Grizzlies are going to be a top 5 defense in the NBA. I have no real doubt about that.
Me neither.
The concern is the offense. The concern is the offensive side of the court and how they're going to continue to improve and evolve that. I think Marcus Smart not being Dylan Brooks is going to help, who you guys mentioned earlier. He had a career worst offensive season, and Marcus Smart's just not going to shoot the basketball that much. So they're naturally going to improve in that way.
Yeah.
But I also think that we underestimate how important Steven Adams was to the offensive side of things, helping that a half-court offense get extra possessions and create more space to operate with his screens.
Once again, it is Joe Mullinax. Please go ahead and check out all the great work that he does for Bluff City Media. Also, as well, he's the host of Locked On Grizzlies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Go ahead and support him today. Also, a good friend of ours, Rafael Barlow. You know him well from the Locked On NBA draft stuff that he does.
He's phenomenal. Does a great job.
Absolutely. He's a good friend of mine. He saw him when he was here in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, he's just a tremendous person indeed. And, obviously he gets to deal with you guys a lot about, especially with the draft and all the, like Sean said, the great work that your team has done in the draft in recent years. One of the things I want to ask, because this is still a leaning younger team, it still leans younger in
Sure.
so many ways. Which of the young kids do you think is the next, or is poised to be the next individual that steps up to be a major contributor on the Grizzlies roster?
Santi Aldama. If you watched FIBA over the summer, Santi played for Team Spain, and in numerous games, he was the best player for Team Spain, whether he was coming off the bench or as a starter in that lineup. It's Santi Aldama. He's 6'11". He has the ability to score at all three levels. He really showcased that in the international game. Obviously, the NBA is different, but he has a sweet three-point stroke. He has the capacity to create off the dribble for himself at that size. For me, it's Santi Aldama. You could make an argument for Jake LaRavia, who has, again, sweet-looking stroke, but LaRavia hasn't contributed at the NBA level yet. He's looked good in G League games, or he's looked good in the Summer League. He hasn't put it all together in NBA opportunities just yet. Santi Aldama, you could have said the same thing about this time last year, but then taken out again. The Lakers exposed him for the defensive liability he is. That's one of the reasons the series was lost. Santi needs to get better in that area. On the offensive side of things, he's one of those guys that can help in the half court because of all the different stuff he can do with the ball in his hands. So I think Santi Aldama is primed to be an 18 to 20 minute a night scorer of the basketball, 8 to 10 points a night, shooting 38% or so from three. He has that ability. And again, at his size, he should be a decent rebounder. He should be an able rim protector as he develops. He's still pretty young, and he's someone who, with more opportunity, I think is going to take advantage of it.
What about a kid like Zaire Williams? I've always been fascinated with his talent, even coming into the draft. Just like you said, one of those individuals who's not put everything together, seems to have a lot of potential, but really hasn't taken that next step as of yet. And now he's no longer like the youngest kid on the team.
Right.
He's now in a position where he needs to start producing for your team on a regular basis.
He needs to be the guy that they wanted him to be last year. DeMichael, my co-host on Locked On Grizzlies, and I, we talked about this time last year, how we thought it was Zaire Williams' time to be that sixth man. Because in his rookie campaign, if you remember correctly, he was tasked with defending Steph Curry and did pretty well at times. He made some big shots in playoff series as the Grizzlies advanced out of the first round for the first time in the Ja Morant era. Zaire has that he's a legitimate 6'9" wing, right? He's not somebody that you look at him and say, oh, he can play the four. He's a stretch four. No, he's a guard. He's a large perimeter-based player, and at least a tall and long one, maybe not large.
Yeah.
He has not been able to fit into what Memphis wants him to be. Now, obviously, Zaire has California connections, playing out there at Stanford in college. I believe he was on LeBron James' son's team, if I remember correctly. I think he has connections.
I think you're right on that one. I remember that vaguely as well.
Calls him Uncle Braun or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Zaire has never been an elite three-point shooter, and Zaire has never been a guy that you task with defending the second best or even the best player for an opposing team. He has a mid-range game, which is really impressive. He reminds me a lot of like a DeMar DeRozan or a Joe Johnson in terms of when he has his offensive game going. He could potentially have that ceiling as a scorer, but the Grizzlies try to avoid those kinds of shots like they're the plague. It's all threes or it's all layups. Because of that, I don't know that Zaire's skill set really fits with what Memphis wants to do. they might be better off attaching him in some sort of trade to try to get an upgrade on the perimeter if they're nervous about Smart being too small, bringing in somebody who is, a bigger, a Dorian Finney-Smith, just as a hypothetical name that's been thrown out there before. Nasir Little from Portland. There's all sorts of different ways you could go to try to find a way to get a guy who could potentially make more sense in what the Grizzlies are trying to do. Zaire Williams at this stage screams like, or smells like, the Grizzlies front office trading up to 10, hoping they get Franz Wagner or Josh Giddey, and neither of those guys falling to them at 10. So they did the next best thing, and it's just not working out. Because you got to remember, that was the trade that brought Steven Adams to Memphis. Yeah. Was that exchange of Adams and 10 for Valanciunas in 17. And then who did the Pelicans take at 17?
Trey Murphy.
Who, aside from his knee injury, looks phenomenal as that three. Imagine Trey Murphy on this Grizzlies team.
Oh my God.
They'd be elite. They'd be elite.
So that's one of the major, Zach Kleiman's done a heck of a job, but that's one of his major flub ups to this point. I don't know that I'm ready to give up on Zaire Williams, but if they don't adjust their scheme and allow for him to cook, so to speak, in the space that he's best at, it might be time to move on from him, just because you're going to hurt his trade value if you keep letting him, struggle about.
Once again, it's Joe Mullinax. Please support him today on all of his different ventures, starting with the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, also as well Bluff City Media. Magic Man, you've got some questions for Joe on the Grizzlies. Again, a team that I'm not trying to rub salt into the wound or anything. Again, we got eliminated too, not too much later after that. So we've got some, things that we would like to say. I've got a Nuggets preview coming up here at the end of the week. So, we'll be on the other end of that, so to speak. So, Magic Man, do you have any questions for Joe on the Memphis Grizzlies, my friend?
Well, I just want to state for the record, Joe, it was a 6-game series, but Memphis was missing Steven Adams and Brandon Clark. Sure. When you're missing your best 3-and-D player and you're missing a force that is Steven Adams, that changes the series stylistically. Yeah. And not to mention, Ham threw stuff at Taylor Jenkins that he didn't throw at anybody in the season. So that was an adjustment as well. I just want to say those two things played a huge factor in the series.
Well, also as well, Rui. I think Rui's development in that series threw everybody off, I think. Both sides.
Yeah, he literally had never done that before. And I do think that's important to point out. And that's a credit to him. I kept saying, no way Rui Hachimura keeps doing this. There's no way. Oh, he did it again. There's no way he can do it a third time. Oh, he did it a third time, right? He took a leap at a very unfortunate time for Memphis Grizzlies fans and the franchise alike. That series was frustrating. Once you get to Game 6, the deflating feeling of Luke Kennard not being able to play and feeling like that was the final nail in the coffin. I agree that Luke Kennard is underappreciated, but at the same time, he couldn't get off the bench for the Clippers 4 months prior, going back to that time. And now he's the most important Grizzlies player to try to survive a Game 6 out in Los Angeles. It was really tough. And, the Ja Morant stuff, he was never the same. He had some good games in that series, but you could just tell his body language was off, that it was the feeling, the vibe was different. The whole team, it just seemed like they were ready to be anywhere else. And the way that Game 6 concluded, that was the most disappointing part. Like losing to a Lakers team who was one of the best in the NBA since the trade deadline, losing to a Lakers team that has, when healthy, 2 of the top 10 to 15 players in the NBA, and Anthony Davis and LeBron James, Austin Reeves playing the way that he was playing. It sucks, but you get it, right? It was the way that they lost that was the most disappointing thing. That's what felt like the step backwards for me, is this was a team that scratched and clawed and fought. They just laid down in that Game 6. And I think that's a real reason to point to the significance of Marcus Smart. If Marcus Smart was on that team, that Game 6 never happens that way. Maybe the Lakers win still. I'm not trying to make it seem like I think Marcus Smart turns the tide in that way. I think the Lakers were the better team. And usually in a 7-game series, that fleshes out. I don't think they get blown out. And I think that he's being brought in to be that mentally tough component that this team is lacking, a veteran leader that has been through the wars and has been to the NBA Finals and numerous conference championships. He understands what it takes. And you have to keep in mind, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, those guys are coming of NBA age over the last several years. Most people would say Marcus Smart was the leader of those Boston Celtics teams, not one of those guys. Tatum
Mm-hmm.
and Brown might have been better players, but Smart was the leader. And I
Oh,
think you're going to see
Smart was the spiritual leader of that team, no doubt,
right.
Joe.
I think
No
you're going to
doubt.
see a rebirth of that with the Memphis Grizzlies. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. They are all more talented players. Marcus Smart's going to take and own this team, I think, and make it his.
One thing I do want to ask you, though, is when it comes to the Grizzlies and their future going forward for this season, obviously the Ja Morant suspension is going to be paramount the first 25 games of the season without Ja Morant. I ask you, what do you qualify as a good start during that time frame? Let's say game 26. You do a show on, because you've got to do at least 5 shows a week on the Locked On podcast. I know this all too well. But one thing I want to ask you, obviously you're going to look back on the 25 games that he was out and ask, was it good or beneficial? Was it something you could build upon for the season? What are you looking to go ahead and say, you know what, this was a job well done by the team, as far as what record do you think would be satisfying to you during that time?
I haven't written or talked about this yet, but I think that they could take a page from the Los Angeles Lakers of this past year. And I know, and hear me out, I think that, and I made this bold prediction on the Stadium podcast, Points in the Paint, because I do their Grizzlies preview as well. I think the Grizzlies could have the best record in the NBA upon Morant's return. So up until that point, as long as they tread water, like if they're 11-14, 10-15, even a few games below 500, I think that the Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, yeah, they're undersized, but that's 3 legitimate creators of offense on the dribble, right? And then you've got Steven Adams creating screens and space for all those dudes to operate. You've got Jaren Jackson Jr., who has evolved as a scorer, can shoot the 3, always has been able to do that, but now he's getting to the basket off the dribble. You've got Luke Kennard off the bench. You've got Santi Aldama. You have so many pieces that as long as you're able to keep them together and healthy, the Grizzlies just have a lot of good functional basketball players. And that depth, when it's not being tested, can lead to success in the regular season. So the reason I say take a page out of the Lakers playbook is not necessarily to revamp the roster halfway through the year. It's more so about Ja Morant's there. You have the capacity to have this depth. You have a chance to deploy it. And if you get hot and you're, again, best record after December 19th, that puts you in the 5th seed conversation, probably in the Western Conference. I think the Lakers will probably be a top 4 or so team. That would be a prediction of mine. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. I think you have the Nuggets, obviously still in play. The Warriors appear to want to continue to be good. The Western Conference is going to continue to be a gauntlet. The Grizzlies did not make the Marcus Smart trade to win in the regular season. They did it because they want to be better prepared for the spring. And I think if Memphis is in a spot long-term where they can get to a place, 5 seed, 6 seed even, and they're facing off against a Golden State team that's another year older, and Memphis has all these weapons, if they can figure out their half-court offense issues, this is a really good basketball team still that I think is being overlooked. I think they'll have more issues without Ja than they've had in the past, but I think once Morant returns, assuming, again, knock on wood, that he actually returns and is the Ja Morant of old and is an MVP candidate quality player, there's not going to be many teams in the NBA better than the Memphis Grizzlies if they can keep all that together.
Once again, please check out the great work that Joe Mullinax does, part of Bluff City Media, and of course the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, and a whole ton of stuff is right there available to you about the Grizzlies and the NBA. Please check out and support his work today. Magic Man, you have any more thoughts right there on the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that, I'm starting to agree. Once you get out of the injuries that they have as far as facing themselves in the beginning part of the season, and once they get out of the suspension from Ja Morant, I'm going to tell you, Magic Man, and you might want to lead that into a question for Joe. I think they look pretty good.
Yes, absolutely, Gerald. I agree. And I was just going to ask Joe the same thing. I mean, Joe, you kind of alluded to it when Ja comes back, who the best 5 would be on the floor. And it obviously would be Ja at the 1, Smart at the 2, Desmond Bane at the 3. Then you got Triple J and Adams. So sans Ja Morant, who's the best 5 to start with the tip for Memphis? Because if it was me, Joe, I would go with Smart, Concher, Bane, Triple J, and Adams. I just think John Contra is a better defender than Luke Kennard. I think he gives them a lot more balance. But they might go with Kennard. Who would you go with, Joe?
I would go with Kennard just because I'm so tired of watching John Conchar play basketball. I'm just over it. And I agree with your assessment of Conchar. I think that you're right that he's a better defender. He's certainly a better rebounder. And that's something that the Grizzlies need to improve upon as well, is their rebounding. But Steven Adams, again, if we're assuming health for everyone, you have to assume health for Steven Adams. And if Steven Adams is out there, he negates a lot of those problems and helps magnify and maximize the strengths of a Jaren Jackson Jr. by his side. I think it's Kennard because, again, the half-court offense is the biggest problem. I find it hard to believe that a team, again, Desmond Bane is an above-average defender. He is better defensively than people give him credit for. He's elite offensively, right? It's him and other all-stars, Kyrie Irving, Nikola Jokic in terms of 21 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Desmond Bane's a pretty rarefied air if you look at the numbers. But he's a decent defender too. I refuse to believe that Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart, Steven Adams, that Luke Kennard is going to be the bane of their existence. And that's the reason that they're going to fall to a top 20 defense instead of a top 15 or 10 with Ja Morant out. I just struggle to see that. And you can argue Kennard, because he tries hard, might be better defensively than Ja Morant in some ways. So I would go Kennard because, again, Bane and Kennard together, you guys saw it in the Lakers series. As dumb as it sounds to say out loud, if I was a Lakers fan and Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane were on the court at the same time, I would have been nervous because they were extremely effective in terms of their floor spacing. So I would maximize that and pray to whatever gods may be that Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Steven Adams can clean up whatever defensive mishaps might happen. Because, again, my goal going into the season, how do you fix the half-court offense? Because if you don't have that, you don't have a chance in a playoff series against a team like the Lakers.
That seems – well, I was going to say – I was going to say that, they have a similar type issues that the Lakers do, that they're not the greatest in a half-court set.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as a younger team, transition, and the Lakers too, they thrive in transition. Obviously, getting to the foul line is a big part of the Lakers game. But Sean, any other questions for Joe on the Memphis Grizzlies? He's been really, really awesome so far as telling his thoughts on what's going on with the Grizzlies. But before I close up with one final question on the Grizzlies, what you got, my friend?
Absolutely. And thanks again, Joe, for popping in. It's been a great conversation. So you mentioned that Kleiman was willing to sacrifice first-round picks, and he hadn't done that before. And you made the comment that's kind of the first step on becoming a contender. As a hoop head, I 100% agree. History's behind you 100% there, sir. What do you think their next step is, the next move? Because do they need more shooting? Do they need, like you said, more of somebody else to come in and kind of like OG Anunoby? Buddy Hield is out there. Though I think those guys would come in and kind of.
They're now getting the daily treatment everywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, Gerald, Memphis has been sniffing around OG for about the past 2 years.
I agree.
True. I don't think they're going to get OG Anunoby because if they were going to get OG Anunoby, they would have already, right?
Okay.
Like there's reports that the Grizzlies threw every first-round pick they possibly could at Kevin Durant. And the Nets were like, oh, this is interesting. Kevin, what do you think? And Kevin was like, nah, I'm going to Phoenix, right? Or Mikal Bridges. There were reports of 4 to 5 first-round picks that Memphis offered, and Brooklyn said no. There were reports of OG Anunoby, 3 first-round picks in Toronto saying no. I think if the Grizzlies really wanted Anunoby to be a member of the Memphis Grizzlies, they would have overpaid by now. But this is a front office that refuses to overpay. So Buddy Hield is intriguing because what does an overpay look like for Buddy Hield, who, for the last several years, everybody has just said he's going to be a Los Angeles Laker. Well, maybe that eventually is true. Maybe that's true now. Maybe that's true in a week or a year. But I think that if you were able to have, and this is just me being crazy, apparently, because half of the Grizzlies fan base wanted to put my head on a silver platter for this. If you take Zaire Williams, who I mentioned a moment ago, may not fit, right? Brandon Clark, who's recovering from an Achilles injury. And if there's anybody in the NBA whose skill set is dependent on ability to leap and then leap again rapidly off of that, a second jump, it's Brandon Clark. So I'm worried about Clark's health long-term.
Yeah.
You do those two guys in a first-round pick to the Indiana Pacers for Buddy Hield, a year rental. Like, some people say that's not enough. Other people say that's an overpay. Imagine having one of, or in some cases, both of, two of the three, Desmond Bane, Luke Kennard, and Buddy Hield on the floor together. Like, imagine that with Ja Morant and Steven Adams. Like, what are we talking about?
Bombs away.
I am concerned about offensive efficiency. I want to see that half-court offense get better. Marcus Smart's not getting traded, obviously. I think it would take a lot to move on from Steven Adams at this point. Jaren Jackson Jr., of course, is not going anywhere. As long as those three guys are on your roster, I struggle to see you having anything less than a top 10 defense, regardless of who else is next to those dudes. So I think that a Buddy Hield would make a lot of sense for these Grizzlies. And whether it's 1 year or they convince him to resign, whatever the case might be, just putting themselves out there to say, okay, if you didn't think we were serious after Marcus Smart, now we're super serious. And I don't think they're going to do that. That's not really how they operate. We've mentioned David Roddy and Zaire Williams and Jake LaRavia. They have a lot of theoretical bodies that should be able to fill that role. They just haven't been able to have that opportunity yet. And again, if you're a contending team, you're usually not depending on 22-year-olds to help you get there.
Well, but you feel that if you got a Hield, you have enough defense to go ahead and support both the Hield, Kennard, because obviously would be hurting a little bit on defense with those two out there. But if you have a Triple J, Steven Adams, you feel that you have enough defense to support that.
You're blowing by Buddy Hield or Luke Kennard in dribble penetration, but Steven Adams or Jaren Jackson Jr. standing right there.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you're going to be able to score over those guys consistently. You might be able to hit a mid-range jumper, but that's what most defenses are trying to get you to hit, right? That's the point of a drop coverage. That's the point of a lot of these schemes. Okay, take the mid-range. That's the least efficient shot in basketball, at least depending on your ability to hit it, which is another layer to that conversation. But again, my biggest concern, the Grizzlies are a very strong defensive team. Taylor Jenkins is strongest in terms of his X's and O's. He's a Mike Budenholzer disciple from the Milwaukee Bucks days. He is going to have a good defense. I'm not worried about that. They have the 25th ranked offense, half-court wise, in the NBA. As long as Ja Morant's on the roster, they're probably going to be solid in transition. They need to find ways to score in the half-court and create as much space for their MVP caliber talent in Ja Morant, once he returns, to operate. I think that having another elite three-point shooter would do that, but maybe I'm crazy.
You're not crazy. You're not crazy, Joe.
No.
You're not crazy at all. And if I was talking to half of those Memphis fans who thought you were cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, I would say, yeah, you're sacrificing athleticism, but you're not sacrificing versatility for the reasons you just laid out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to understand that Luke Kennard has not been used as well. I mean, you watch old Detroit Pistons film of Luke Kennard, and he can create as a secondary facilitator off the bounce in the pick and roll. Like, I think Buddy Hield as a catch and shoot, dribble and sidestep to the three, he can continue to evolve in that way. They just need more offensive weaponry to give Ja Morant space, because we can ask him to evolve as a mid-range shooter. We can ask him to work on his pull-up jumper. That's kind of like asking, Michael Jordan to dunk less, right? Like, it just feels like Ja Morant is really good at getting to the basket. You want to maximize that talent, put shooters out on the perimeter that you have to respect, and let the guy cook.
One question from our audience, and I've got a question of my own. Delano Hart is asking where your playmaking comes from in this sort of lineup without Ja there for the first 25 games.
That's a good question, and thank you for it. I think that Desmond Bane is somebody. It was either 4 or 5 assists. I always mix the number up, but he was a pretty good creator for a wing combo guard in the NBA on the perimeter last year. Marcus Smart, again, if they kind of share that responsibility, Smart as a true point guard is not the best look, but if he and Bane can kind of go halvesies, as the technical term, on the point guard position, I think that can be successful. And Steven Adams is an underrated passer. his first year in Memphis, he and Bane really developed a really fun rapport. And Adams had a career year creating at the high post off the elbow, circa Marc Gasol, who I know, a shared lineage there with the Gasol brothers between Lakers fans and Grizzlies fans. Mark did a lot of that during his time in Memphis, passing out of the elbow and the high post. And Steven Adams has that ability, not quite like Gasol, but Adams can do similar things in that way. So it'll be kind of by committee. Ja Morant is an underrated playmaker for others at this stage of his NBA career. But I think that they'll be able to have numerous players that can do that. Once you get beyond those guys, it gets a little bit more iffy, right? You're essentially depending on Derrick Rose, who hasn't been Derrick Rose in a long time. But for 25 games, can he come in for 12 minutes and give you a couple of assists and a couple of buckets? Probably so. And that'll be another name that you'll have to watch with Morant out.
So where do you see the Memphis Grizzlies this season? You talked about the Lakers, and thank you for your thoughts on that. We'll go ahead a little bit more into detail here in a minute, but where do you see the season for the Grizzlies up ahead? Obviously, it could be touch and go the first 25 games, but coming out of it could make your team a lot stronger.
This will be a season because the Grizzlies, up until the point we talked about how for the first time they gave up some of their own first-round picks.
Yeah.
Progress is part of this rebuild because that's basically what they've been doing. They're really good at it, but the Grizzlies have been rebuilding. Part of this rebuild has been showing that you can grow your young team in an organic way and have success. But part of that has also been the idea that progress is not always linear, right? And I think last year is a great example of that. They took another step forward 2 times in a row. They were the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. That's not easy to do in a Western Conference that almost everybody is trying to win, right? So progress isn't always linear. I think this is going to be another example of that, but in a different way. I think they're going to wind up being the 5 or 6 seed in the Western Conference for the regular season. Like I said, I think they'll struggle without Ja more than they have in the past because Tyus Jones isn't there. But Tyus Jones, if he's not a starting point guard, is not a good point guard. Like that's one of the common misconceptions in the NBA. Look at his numbers as a true reserve behind Morant. He struggled mightily. When he started for Ja, he had great numbers. And that's why I think if you play fantasy basketball, I would draft Tyus Jones late in your draft and look brilliant because he's going to play well for the Wizards, I promise you, because he's going to be the starter. He doesn't have to worry about being a backup anymore. But he wasn't that in Memphis, and that hurt them. But when he was the starter for Ja, it obviously helped. So I think that they'll struggle a little bit more because Marcus Smart is not Tyus Jones. That doesn't mean that it was a bad trade. It's just the reality of them saying, we're not as concerned about the regular season as we are April and May, right? Ja will come back, guns a-blazing, pun intended, unfortunately. They will be in a position where as long as he's able to stay on the floor, in my opinion, they'll be the best team in the league, similar to the Lakers. Again, the Lakers did it via the trade deadline. Memphis will be a return to play and form, hopefully, from their MVP candidate caliber player, Ja Morant. That'll put them at the 5 or 6 seed. And I think they can make a run at the Western Conference Finals. I really do. I think that they have that ability with Marcus Smart in the fold. Maybe they'll see the Lakers again in the Western Conference Finals and get knocked off. But once you get to the Western Conference Finals, you roll out the ball and you compete as best you can and see where the chips fall. Just getting there would be a success for a team. To your point from earlier, I think Desmond Bane is 25. Ja Morant's 24. Jaren Jackson Jr. is 24. Desmond Bane's under contract for the next 6 years. Ja Morant for the next 5 years. Jaren only the next 2, but Jaren's going to be very motivated to get some All-NBA Defensive Player of the Year love, as Bobby Marks of ESPN reported. If he gets an All-NBA or Defensive Player of the Year award, he'll be eligible for a 5-year, $300+ million extension as a supermax. So Jaren's going to have a lot of opportunity without Ja out, and I think he's going to be motivated by that possible extension. So the Grizzlies have their big 3. I think Marcus Smart is the guy that can help lead them through these next few years. I'm a believer in this team, even if they drop a little bit in terms of regular season standings.
Once again, it is Joe Mullinax. He's doing a great job with us. He does an even better job on Bluff City Media, plus also as well, Locked On Grizzlies podcast. It's available to you on your podcast outlets 5 days a week. So please go ahead and check out all the great work that he's doing today. Magic Man, I will start with you on the Lakers questions. So go ahead, my friend. Any Lakers questions for Joe before we head on out?
Yeah, Joe, you said you really liked what the Lakers did in the offseason. We kind of feel the same way. However, if you had to pinpoint where a weakness would be that it can expose some flaws, what would you say that weakness is for the Lakers right now?
Jared Vanderbilt. And I think most Lakers fans would agree with that. And I love Jared Vanderbilt. He's a guy that I really wanted the Grizzlies, to try to go after potentially before the trade to the Lakers. I would say Vanderbilt because he's so limited offensively. He's like a worse Brandon Clark in that way. Obviously, Vanderbilt's a better defender. I think he's a better energy player than Clark, but Clark has a little bit more offensive acumen to his game, especially as a finisher in the pick and roll. Vanderbilt, you almost don't have to pay attention to at all on that end. If he can develop, and he did do some growth in the playoffs, that's important to point out. If he can continue that development, and especially that contract number, that was one of the most frustrating things about the Lakers offseason. Every contract you looked at, you were like, crap, that's good value, right? Like they made smart signings. Like they were operating as a functional front office. And I think the Vanderbilt deal, which is very similar in structure to what Brandon Clark signed, is a good deal, especially if you consider that he's young and he should be able to grow into that money a little bit. I'd say Vanderbilt's somebody to worry about because you need a player like that, but you also need for them not to be a complete offensive liability.
Well, the thing is, though, with Vanderbilt, it's a mid-level right now when it starts out.
Sure.
But as the money gets bigger everywhere else, that will actually be below mid-level. So
Right.
hopefully it will get some nice return on that contract. I agree
Mhm.
with you on that. A lot of the hopes for the Lakers, I think, it pins themselves on him and what he can do to progress as an individual, especially on the offensive end going forward. And that is a big if going forward indeed. The lonely Lakers question I have for you, because you already said you see them around a third, fourth place, which is where
Mhm.
most of the experts that we've had about 20, 22, 23 so far, Sean. Yeah,
Yep.
and most of them are picked right around the third and fourth in the Western Conference. What do you think the gap is between? I'm assuming, and I'm going to assume that
Mhm.
Denver and Phoenix are at the top of your list there. What do you think the gap is between those two teams and everyone else, like the Grizzlies, like the Lakers, and like everybody else in the Western
Not
Conference?
that big. I mean, the Grizzlies were a couple of games behind the Denver Nuggets for the 1 seed, until a few weeks left in the regular season. There was a chance that Memphis still could have caught Denver for the 1 seed. So that's the thing about the Western Conference. Like the Nuggets are really good and they should be, the old Ric Flair adage, to be the man, you got to beat the man. The favorite in the Western
Woo!
Conference should be the Denver Nuggets because they're the man. But you've got the Phoenix Suns and you've got the Los Angeles Lakers. You've got the Memphis Grizzlies. You've got the Sacramento Kings, who nobody talks about, but it's not like they're just going to magically become bad at basketball, right? Like they're still going to be hanging around and have some success. You almost everybody except probably Portland here in the next couple of days, right? Assuming they trade away Damian Lillard. Very few teams in the Western Conference are actively trying to be bad. Even the Houston Rockets, Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks. It's going to be hard for them to be as bad as they were last season with veterans like that on their team. So the Western Conference is a gauntlet. If you're assuming health for everybody, I do think that you have to give Denver and Phoenix their due. But at the same time, if I was a Lakers fan, there's no reason I wouldn't go into a 7-game series and not think I could compete with anybody in the Western Conference, assuming that LeBron James is healthy and rested, assuming that Anthony Davis is healthy and willing to play the center position on a consistent basis. As long as all of that fits into place, again, Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, all the great re-signings and movements that they did in the offseason, the Lakers are right up there with anybody in the Western Conference. It's a multi-horse race in the West. And that's part of what makes covering that aspect of the NBA so much fun.
I've got a question from Bloodhound in our chat. It's back to Grizzlies just real quick. And then after that, we're
Okay.
going to go ahead and give all the time to you on everything you're working on. He
Sure.
asked 2 questions. What do you think the Grizzlies still need to contend? And then do you think they should go back to the teal jerseys as their permanent look?
I love the teal jerseys. I'm good with their current uniform selections, but I do like them as a city kind of addition. As far as what they need for contention, a Mikal Bridges, right? Maybe that's what they want for contention. And again, they're not going to get Mikal Bridges. And most teams, like I'm sure Lakers fans, will be like, "Oh, Mikal Bridges would be great," right? Like that's probably the type of player a lot of teams want.
But you're a team
bigger
that has
wing.
the assets that could possibly get him. Could.
Yeah, but if it involves trading away Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., or Ja Morant, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
True.
Right? Like if you're able to give everything away and keep those three guys, yeah, I agree with you. But like we talked about a little bit earlier in the show, multiple reports came out that they threw the house at for Kevin Durant. They threw 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. If that's not going to get the job done, and they say, oh, well, we need Desmond Bane. Well, the Grizzlies have that guy under contract for 6 years, and he's one of the most efficient offensive weapons in the NBA. It doesn't make sense to trade Desmond Bane. Okay, cool, you have Mikal Bridges now, but you lost Desmond Bane. I think whatever the best player they could possibly get to keep Ja, Bane, and Jaren together, that would be worth exploring. And I'm sure they already have. But at the same time, again, missing on the Zaire Williams pick so far hurts them a good bit. Because if that was Trey Murphy III, we're having a different conversation right now. Like this would be a much more dangerous team if they had that caliber of scorer and shooter. And again, decent defender, putting aside the injury that he has. That's really a significant piece to this. If Zaire Williams can come along, this team's ceiling goes up even higher because they have that bigger wing that can help defend. Marcus Smart is obviously a tenacious defender and basketball player. The laws of physics at some point kick in, and you need to have somebody that has that size that can also score the ball. Brandon Ingram would be wonderful on this Grizzlies team. I'm not sure how they would ever get him to Memphis, but he would make a lot of sense.
So before we head on out, I want to go ahead and make sure to give you plenty of time to go ahead and tell everybody about what you're working on and what you're doing. And then Magic Man, some final comments from you, my friend, as well. But go ahead, Joe, what you working on, my friend?
Sure. Well, you mentioned the Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day as a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Getting back into those everyday shows, that's an adjustment coming out of the off season. But I have a wonderful co-host in DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. He's the Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. So he and I have a great rapport and work well together. So subscribe, like, comment, rate, review, all those fun things. I'm the Grizzlies columnist for Bluff City Media. So once or twice a week, I'll be writing about the Memphis Grizzlies as the season begins. Make sure you're checking out my work at bluffcitymedia.co. And I'm on X or Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now at Joe Mullinax, my name. So follow me there. I love doing this. I'm going into my, goodness gracious, my 11th year covering the Memphis Grizzlies. I've started at Grizzly Bear Blues over at SB Nation 11 years ago. And now here I am still doing it. Haven't lived in Memphis for a long time, but it's my way of kind of connecting to the city and being there virtually. It had that much of an impact on me. And, turns out I'm kind of good at it. So it's a great hobby to have, and it's a wonderful opportunity to get a chance to chat with great folks like you. That's one of the coolest things about this. People in Vegas, people in Canada, people, like me hanging out in Virginia, having the chance to talk about basketball in a way that I never thought I would get a chance to do. This is the kind of stuff that makes it all worthwhile. So thank you guys so much for having me.
Absolutely. No problem at all. Magic Man, any last thoughts before we head on out, my friend?
I just wanted to say it was kind of kismet that Gerald got Joe, because I was trying to get DeMichael on as well to talk about the Grizz, but he's a beat writer. He's got a busy job. Couldn't work it out, but I'm so glad that we got the star crossed with Joe, because it was an excellent conversation, and hope to have you on again, Joe.
Absolutely. And DeMichael is phenomenal. I can't stress enough. I love working with DeMichael. No hard feelings if you get him next time, but I'm happy to be with you guys, and, good luck on the season, every game except for the ones where you're playing the Grizzlies.
That's same here as well. We'd also like to make sure we get you on during the season. We'd like to do some pre-games as well. If you guys are available,
Sure.
We would truly be honored to have you back on. Magic Man, one last question before we head on out for you, my friend. I think Delano was asking for your starting lineup. I think he missed our episode when we already covered that. So what was your lineup? It was with Vando, correct or no?
Yes, yeah, it was D'Lo, AR, LeBron, Vando, and AD.
That fifth spot for us, Joe, has been a problem. That's the major source of conversation amongst the Laker fans out there, is who is going to start alongside. And like you, even though the statistics bear out, Joe, like you mentioned, where AD should be playing the 5, should want to play the 5. We know he doesn't want to play the 5, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, he has to play the 5.
He's pretty important. Yeah, he's just better at that, and that's his strength, and that's his most valuable piece. And he gets paid a lot of money to do as he's told. So I think that players having powers like the Damian Lillard situation in Portland, yeah, he has every right to want to go to Miami or do those sorts of things. But the Portland Trailblazers are well within their rights to tell him to kick rocks. And I think that the Lakers and Davis obviously have a much better relationship than that. But if it's best for the team, as determined by the coaching staff and ownership and everybody involved in that decision making, every stakeholder, and Anthony Davis just got a pretty fat extension of his own right. We're paying you a lot of money. This is what you're going to do. And in fairness to AD, he seems more amenable to that idea than he has in the past.
Tell you what, Joe, you've been fantastic for us. We are truly indebted to you. Anything you ever need from us, let us know. We'd love to have you on again, as we said.
Of course.
Magic Man, any last thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with Joe. Every time AD sees that direct deposit in his account, he should say, they want me to play center, I'm going to play center.
Yeah, the numbers should make him feel a lot better about that. Plus the fact he lives in beautiful Southern California. It doesn't get much better than that, right?
100%.
Yeah, absolutely, indeed. But once again, check out Joe Mullinax on whatever he's doing, whether it's also, of course, Bluff City Media. Please go ahead, check him out as the host of Locked On Grizzlies. And of course, follow him today, Joe Mullinax, on Twitter/X. I don't know, we all might be shut out. Yeah, if they throw a paywall at us, you never know. We might even be.
Oh, yeah, I'm never paying for that. That's never happening. I don't know that I'm going to sign up for Threads or whatever the hell that's called. I'm not doing that either. But I'm definitely not paying for any of that. So
that's ridiculous. Oh my gosh. It was so nice when social media was just free and that was it. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Simpler times 18 months ago.
This is true. Absolutely true. Thank you again, Joe. Truly appreciate all your help for being on today's show. Tomorrow we've got Chris Hine, Minnesota Timberwolves, going to be covering that. Plus also we'll probably do a show later in the day. And Magic Man has an experience. I guess you have a experience coming up tomorrow with the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, I'll be with John Voida and Matthew Lissy of the Suns Jam Sessions podcast drill tomorrow.
They were terrific on our show.
They are. Yeah. They are great.
If you want some great guests covering Phoenix, Joe, I would reach out to them. They were fantastic. Yes.
Sounds good.
Yep. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow for at least one or two great shows coming at you right here at the Lakers Fast Break Podcast.